There we go. Okay. Alrighty. That'll work. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right, this is our last Sunday, really, of Epiphany. We got the Transfiguration next Sunday, and then Lent. Yay! So, it's so the gospel is the gospel is always the main theme of the day, and Epiphany, the whole season is about the revelation of Jesus Christ, revealing Him. That He is God, revealing that He is, all the aspects of revealing who He is. So, the Magi come, we come to worship the King. He's a King. His baptism, God the Father points to Him and says, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased." So He's the King. He's the Son of God. He is the one who does miracles. He does all of God's work. He raises, He heals the sick. He preaches His word. And now we have, the last 2 weeks, we started with Luke's Beatitudes, and we have the last portion of the Sermon on the Plain here, where he says all these really fun, easy things, like love your enemies, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you, turn the other cheek, give to everyone who begs from you, and from the one who takes your goods, don't demand them back. Love, do good to those who, when it's no benefit to you. Love your enemies, do good. Lend without expecting anything in return. Be merciful, judge not, condemn not, forgive, excuse me. All this good stuff. Which is a little bit of an anomaly just in the whole season of this is who Jesus is, and now he's saying, do all these things. To a degree, this is law. I mean, he's saying this is what you should be doing. This is how you should be living. According to the law of God, this is what our lives should look like. But I mean, it does reveal who Jesus is, because this describes him. You could read this. The Spirit could work on this in your heart as law. If you're having trouble forgiving somebody right now, chances are the Spirit's going to use this text to work the law. Jesus says forgive. I gotta forgive, and all this stuff. But you very well could bring a gospel slant to this and show you this. Yeah, this is a terrible description of us. This does not describe us at all. It describes what we should be, certainly, but it describes Jesus perfectly. The one who did love his enemies, the one who did turn the other cheek, who gave without expecting anything back. And forgiveness. The judging and condemning. This is where we kind of but you can go right to where Jesus says, he didn't come to the world to condemn the world, but that the world will be saved through him. His proper work is not judgment, condemnation. It is grace, forgiveness. Now the flip side of that is when we are outside of that grace, forgiveness, we are judged, we are condemned. This is what is brought. It's not even what's brought to us. It's just our current state of being. It's not like we're sitting here completely indifferent, should I choose grace of Jesus Christ, or should I choose to be judged and condemned? No. You sit here judged and condemned. We are all judged and condemned in our sins, just on our own. The grace of Christ comes to set us free from that, to bring us out of that. So really, this is a great picture of Jesus. So this is why it fits in with the whole Epiphany kind of theme. Because usually you would see this in a reading like this in the seasons after Pentecost, or the Sundays after Pentecost, once we get into the ordinary time of the year. Because that's all teachings of Jesus, his ministry, lessons that we can learn from him. Whereas Epiphany, all about revealing Jesus. Lent, repentance, contrition. Easter, proclamation, celebration. all this good stuff. So, so yeah, that's the gospel at least. I'm preaching on the Old Testament, which I was shocked. I've only preached on that once before. How many years has it been?
Genesis?
Yes, 14 years now, I guess. And I've only preached on it once?
Hmm.
I don't know how that happened.
This is a good one.
Yeah, I know, right? This is why I was kind of surprised I only preached on it once. I didn't even like the sermon I preached on it too. I read it, I'm like, oh, this isn't that good. So yeah, it's a great text. The connection there is, Joseph forgives his brothers, shows mercy. So obviously there's that connection there with the gospel and the theme of the day.
Forgiveness.
Yeah. The place where I'm going with it today is really, there we go. I could put down my Bigby cup, but why would I do that? This idea of the hidden God, and really the theology of the cross. Mary's gonna love it.
I'll probably do
No, that'd be a surprise. Because I can't wait to get to the part of the sermon where it becomes clear that this is where she's going, and I can look at her. I can already see her in my head where she's going to perk up in the pew and go, oh, theology of the cross. See, I know how I mostly know how you guys react to some things. So when there's parts in the sermons where I'm like, ooh, this person's going to get a kick out of that. And I always watch it for them. It's a little fun I have. But the hiddenness of God, particularly with when Joseph says, so it was not you who sent me here, but God. Because the brothers were the ones who sent him, the brothers sold him off. The brothers were the reason why Joseph went through all the hell he went through. And then here Joseph says, no, it wasn't you, it was God. And I do point out in the sermon that in chapter 50, I think, is when Joseph says, the classic, what you meant for evil, God meant for good.
You could almost replace the name Joseph with Jesus.
Don't go too far ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're going to ruin the whole twist in my sermon there. But I mean, honestly, yeah.
You could have Paul help you.
The cool thing
that'd
about
be a weird sermon.
Well, and honestly, the sermon is, the way I break it down is just because if you don't make the pole jump there, usually it's a hard thing to grasp, and where we often kind of go with it is, well, how do we make sense of like what Joseph says here? I mean, if God was the one, especially like, when Joseph says what you meant for evil, God meant for good, like, yeah, I totally get that. We do things that are terrible, and God is able to work good things out of that. And even our intention, God's intention is the one that works and wins. Okay, great. What he says here is a little bit more problematic, because he says, no, it was God who sent me here. So it's like God was the one working. He was the one, puppet master pulling the strings. And I think the problem that we have with the text is we don't go that way. We don't see Joseph as the Christ figure in this text. And really we see ourselves in Joseph, because Joseph, he is the main character in the whole story, right? Joseph is the core. These terrible things happened to Joseph, and yet he persevered. These horrible things happened to Joseph, and yet God elevated him to the status of a king. And so then we apply that to our lives, and we say, well, God led me through suffering. Why did he lead me through suffering? Well, unless you're sitting high on the hog and your life is perfect right now, it's really hard for you to probably say, wow, I look back at all the ways I've suffered, and I see how God worked that suffering, how God brought me into that suffering, and I see why he brought me out of it to where I am now. It's hard. That's a good wrestling thing. And that does lead us into a lot of conversations about, does God control everything? Does he, well, he works in all things, absolutely. But we like to say, well, God doesn't, he doesn't make everything happen, but he does allow things to happen. That's a lot more comfortable. Like, something terrible happened, some tragedy. Did God cause that tragedy? We're like, ugh. God allowed the tragedy. Like, is there a difference? I mean, honestly, because that's the way I try to phrase things a lot more, because it's softer. It's a lot easier for us to hear. Why did that person die? Why did God make that person die? Well, he allowed that. He allowed that accident. He allowed it. Well, why did he allow it? I mean, it really gets us into the same place.
Does that go back to free will?
Well, and that's the pit that we always end up in. Is like, well, now we have to wrestle with free will, and to what extent? And is it not? Do we have it? Do we not? If we do, how much? And God's will, how does that work? And it's just we start. Here's God and all his plans. I just call it plan. And here's us. So, and we're just like trying to go here, and like we try to reverse engineer it. Because all we see is this. All we see are all these things happening. So we take all this and we try to go back and figure out, okay, well then, it must mean this. It must mean this. Well, this would have been a good illustration. I'm not going to use it in the sermon. Have you ever read really bad instructions that have been translated several times? Or it's really fun. Google's a great tool for goofing off. Like, take like a normal English, a paragraph of English, translate it into German, translate that into Japanese, translate that into Spanish, and then translate that back into English. That's just good time. And I think that's kind of how that works for us. We end up trying to sort out what was the original instructions there when it's gone through all these different, we can't really piece it together. I think the problem...
In other words, you're saying that God doesn't always speak the same language as we do.
I wasn't going there, but I do like that. I'll have to use that at some point. But I think that the core of the issue there is that, and what I say in my sermon, is that, we want to see all these things through the lens of our own suffering. So, kind of like with Joseph, we want to see all the things through the suffering of Joseph. Why did he suffer like that? And God brought him through that. So how is God going to work that in our lives? But the problem with that is kind of like what you point out. Sounds like Joseph is the Jesus figure here. Joseph functions as the Christ figure. He is the one, and I mean, it's not even subtle. Joseph is hated by the family who's supposed to love him. Now you could say it was deserved. He was kind of obnoxious, and it's like, I don't know, he just interpreted his dreams. He was loved most of all, and his brothers hated him for it. He had dreams, and he interpreted them correctly, and they didn't like it. So they hated him. They wanted to kill him. He became a servant, a slave, and then was raised to be a king for the purpose of saving the people. I mean, I don't know how much more on the nose you can get with saying this is a Christ figure. So then in that, should we identify with Joseph or with his brothers? Should we identify with the innocent one who suffered and was raised to be king, or should we identify with the brothers who did a lot of evil stuff and were suffering greatly on account
Let's
of
go in between.
it?
We did that last week.
Yeah, I think because once you kind of focus in on that and say, we're really more of that. Well, it's like, yeah, I mean, his brothers were.
Yeah, but that's disgusting.
I know, right? requires like repentance and all that. But I mean, that's the thing. We see it through that lens. We're like, okay, so now we can see the suffering, not through our suffering, but through the suffering that God gave to Joseph, not because it's ours, but because God was saving through. God saved the brothers through Joseph, just like God saves us through Christ. So bringing it back to this theology of the cross is, yeah, everything we see and understand about God is through the lens of the cross. It's the only way we can. And this hiddenness of God is a great Lutheran. I assume it started with. I mean, it didn't start with Luther, but I mean, he really hammered this, and I think we seem to hammer it a little bit more than other denominations. I think I've never really heard it pressed more than Lutherans. Just this hiddenness of God, that God. He's like, you can sum up God in a lot of ways, but he's mighty and he's merciful. Mighty would be his sovereignty. Mighty as God has plans and everything is going to go according to his plan. How can it not, right? He's God. But he's also merciful. He sends his son to be with us, to die for us, to be enmeshed in our existence. And so how does God, he's both these things, right? He's both. How does God want us to know him? From which side? I mean, I know from both. But which is the way that he really most clearly wants us to know him through?
As a merciful Father.
Right. It doesn't diminish this. It doesn't take away that. But where we are broken in sin, yeah, he's mighty. That's not good for us. Being sinners before a mighty, sinners and a vengeful God. It's like, that's not good news at all. And if that was the way God wanted us to know him, then okay. I mean, you don't need Jesus for that. You need, great and powerful God. But he sends Jesus so that we know him through his son, through Christ, through grace and mercy. He hides himself behind the suffering of Christ. He hides himself there. The cross is ugly and yet it's beautiful. These awesome little tensions that we have. So that way, this is how he wants us to know him. Like we know him this way. That's like natural knowledge of God stuff. I mean, look out into creation. It's crazy, mighty, powerful. God can create all this. I mean, nature's terrifying. I don't care. You might like nature and all that. Nature wants to kill us all. It's just this. We have to struggle to survive in nature. Creation in itself, broken by sin, is just oof. Wow. Okay, our weakness is on full display. But he sends Jesus because that's how he wants to be known. And that's where the theology of the cross goes. That's how we understand this. This is theology of the cross versus a theology of glory, where the shorthand of that is a theology of glory looks at the hidden things of God and says, this is what it means. So tragedy happens. God is working through that, and he's done it because it's good. It's good that God did that. Because that's the only thing you can, if you're working just from this, well, everything has to be good. Because God does it all, right? So, kid runs across the street, gets hit by a car, dies. That's a good thing. I mean, push to the extremes, you have to acknowledge that. Famine kills off thousands and thousands of people. That's a good thing. Because if God did it, the fires in LA, whatever. If God did it or allowed it, either way, it must be good. So that's where glory comes in. The theology of the cross says God is good and God is merciful. God is mighty and God is merciful. We can't understand the hows and whys of this, because it's just we're not God, we can't. You know, why does this happen? I don't know. You know, I always say the best I can say is the reason behind things is to draw us closer to Him. And that opens up the discussion of like, well, why did God have to do that? I mean, if He wanted to draw us closer, He didn't have to go to that extreme. To which I say, we're that stubborn. I know how that works. It's the old, you know, the addict has to hit rock bottom. Well, sad to say, humanity still has not hit our rock bottom yet. we're still going. Some of us individually have, you know, that's us. But you know, and even in faith, you know, we sometimes are very stubborn and have to be humbled. So we can't understand. But
to be fair, we don't understand merciful either.
Oh,
we
absolutely
experience
not.
merciful, but we don't understand it.
Oh yeah, well yeah, that doesn't make sense either. Because God's justice to us is an injustice. Because He's merciful. I mean, you can't be perfectly just, and then grace and mercy just don't work with that. You know, just is right, wrong, clear, black and white, justice, and God's justice is perfect. And then mercy, it's like, and then they say, well, why some and not others? Oh, yeah, see, mysteries of God. And then you get into all these things where, you know, theologians love to sit around and argue about this stuff. Weird ones. Circuit meetings, we like to argue about this. But yeah, we don't understand. But yeah, we experience it. Truly. But that's how He wants to be known, is through that, through His mercy. So is it, yeah. I guess that's probably why I never preached on this one.
Does
So
this mean we
very
get to sleep through the sermon
meaty.
today?
What's that?
Does this mean we get to sleep through the sermon?
Yeah, you
today?
might.
Okay.
This is one of those where I didn't change gears, but I did just do an outline, so I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. I mean, it's
You can
roughly
always sit there and stay awake. Just
constrained.
find out, did he put that in class? Missed it.
But it is. I mean, there's a lot in here, and the difficulty of a text like this is just there's so many ways you can kind of just go squirrely with it. But what about this? But what about that? And everybody has their own, you know, your own suffering and your own history with suffering. It's like you can't paint a broad brush, you know. And then especially, well, what about, you know, my suffering? This happened to me, and this happened to me, and this was horrible, and this was utterly life-changing and broke me. Yeah. Why? Like, Jesus? I mean, the old Sunday school answer is always, that's always going to be the answer. You only understand it through Christ. Doesn't mean it's easy. I mean, it'd be a lot easier to preach the gospel, I guess. Hey, people, forgive. Love your enemies. That's easier. So yeah, and then I didn't even bother looking at the epistle because we're coming back on Wednesday nights. We started to get into this Wednesday.
It's interesting too.
Oh, it's great. I mean, 1 Corinthians 15 is the highlight. That's the pinnacle of 1 Corinthians there. Just the you know, the solidness of the resurrection. This is the core. This is what we base everything off of. Because yeah, I mean, if Christ wasn't raised, well, don't worry about any of this. What does it matter? So, any thoughts about all of this fun stuff?
There's something interesting with this mighty and merciful thing in that even in the Old Testament you get much more of this mighty. It feels you people complain that the God of the Old Testament feels very different.
Right.
And this kind of unlocks this for me in that it feels like He's revealing Himself through might in the Old Testament, even when he's being merciful to the Jews, it's via like might towards others.
Right,
It's like
right.
smiting Jael, driving a stake through Sisera's head, and all this like. And then Jesus
That's
comes.
good family fun right there.
Well, it's interesting because like there is no mercy without might almost in the Old Testament until Jesus arrives, and it's this act of perfect mercy where there's
Right.
no smiting and no the might is pointing
Crushing
towards
Satan's
Christ.
head. I mean, that's very inherently violent. Like even there's might in the cross,
Sure.
even though it's merciful.
Well, and God's might is pointed at Christ, away from us,
Mhm.
away from all the rest of humanity for the first time. Maybe.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, this is probably one of the good texts for answering those kind of like what the God of the Old Testament seems to be very different, and it works differently. Because you could point to like Genesis 45 here and be like, no, don't you see? This is like you see mercy, you see Christ in the Old Testament, you see Him at work like that. But it's just it's not. I mean, it's not complete. It's not full. I mean, it's Joseph. It's like. It was for them. It was for his brothers and the people of Israel back then.
And even for them, it wasn't full because I mean, this is salvation through moving to Egypt, which then
For a
caused them
time.
to be enslaved in Egypt.
Yeah.
So it's this pattern of
Right.
salvation and re-enslavement and salvation that's made perfect through Christ when there's no more.
Right,
slavery.
which and then you get that throughout the Old Testament. Well, here you get the cross, I guess. Is it kind of you just get this constant.
Mhm.
And then boom, and it's like that constant redoing salvation, judgment, salvation, and the relapsing, whatever. And then you hit the cross, and that's when it all stops. And from that point forward, which is why, we don't.
So it's just a build up to the cross.
Well, it's always pointing ahead too, yeah. So that's why we don't. Why the Gospels and the New Testament is so fundamentally different is because we don't rehash, because it is it's a new covenant. Old covenant was very much, the people were like, oh, yes, you speak for God and whatever He says, we'll do it. Like, and that's what it looked like. Like, oh, okay, and the cross is where we die. What's the hymn? He bids us come and die. I'm horrible with hymns. Oh, there's something. Oh, now it's gonna bug me.
Google is being utilized right now.
Gen Z's on it.
There we go. There's some hymn that's something like he bids us come and die. But I mean, that's what baptism is. Baptism is a drowning, is a death.
So it's a baptism hymn?
It could be. I don't know.
I mean,
Like I
Rebecca's
said-
got her hymnal right here, and you can look under categories and stuff.
I
Oh, I know that. It's a Bonhoeffer quote.
really?
Yeah.
I swear there's a hymn.
Yeah, when Christ calls a man, He bids us come and die. It's a Bonhoeffer.
It's also kind of a Paul quote, buried.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yeah, right, yeah.
Buried with Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Somebody
not-
probably made a hymn of it. Give it
Say
time.
Chris-
We'll find it.
say
It's-
Chris
I-
Tomlin.
I swear.
This is the first thing that comes out.
Ooh.
Say, I can't say that too loud in here. The
Yeah,
light-
yeah. The lights flicker a little. And
Tomlin.
Yeah, no, 6 feet quarantine for me now. I didn't
Oh,
invoke
it's
the
always
name.
Chris
Not
Tomlin.
you, it's the pastor.
Yes. But,
Okay,
Yeah,
no, I
he does
swear
in his
there's a
free
hymn
time.
that actually has that. Or maybe, but it's something about bids is coming. I don't know.
yeah. No, I
We'll
feel
find
like
it. If not, hey, there's our little window. We need to write that, and that'll be our little footnote to history here. But yeah, I mean, seriously, we come up against it and we die. It's kind of like the whole repeating sacrificial system. It was always like imperfect sacrifices, that never could appease or atone, whatever, until the one comes and it's like, oh, we're done. Because this is the only sacrifice that means and does and all that. So from that point forward, we don't fall back into that old covenant mode. So it has to fundamentally be different for us.
I was gonna say I've heard it argued actually because that is the common notion. You see might in the Old Testament, mercy in the New Testament,
Right.
but that there's almost, if you understand it from the perspective of the cross, you almost have the reverse in this sense of like, obviously, you know, the Israelites are given the Old Testament, or not the Old Testament law, they're given the Mosaic law, and they cannot keep it. You know, it's like there should be no hope. That, you know, they should all be, you know, dealt with on the spot, but yet there is this mercy even before the cross, actually looking towards the cross, but there's actually this mercy of you didn't keep the law, but yet God is still here preserving you towards this thing. You know, there's this this mercy, and there's this sense that like judgment almost becomes more clarified after the cross, just in the sense of like, you know, it's not kind of this keep the law and, you know, kind of look forward to this, look forward to the promise. It's this like, no, do you know Christ? Like, yes, great. If not, like you're in trouble. And so, and just that sense of like that common idea we have of kind of Old Testament God, New Testament God, like actually when you look at it, it's like, well, you know, before the cross, there is so much mercy in like God not destroying everything, and so
the garden.
Right. Yeah. And so I've heard that as a good response to that common, you know, kind of critique that you give the two Gospels. It's like, well, actually, if you heard Jesus preach, he's fairly harsh.
In 2 Peter as well, right? That to him a day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years a day. Like God is not quick to enforce his judgment.
Yes.
But that all men may be saved. Which is interesting.
God is frustratingly slow. Wow. There was something. Oh. It's one of those, like, you know, where God is slow when you want to be fast, fast when you want to be slow. And. Never mind.
Somebody get the man more Bigby.
No, I'm.
Gotta
It's
fill
like
him back up.
it's just like that Murphy's Law sort of thing. How it's always, you know, you expect this and the result is always that. And Christine wanted egg salad sandwiches for dinner the other night. I'm like, all right. So I hard boiled a bunch of eggs for egg salad, and so help me God, every egg peeled perfectly. That's never happened. That never happens. Like I make deviled eggs all the time. It's always a mess. Like I have out of 24 eggs, maybe 3 that actually peeled perfectly, and all the rest were just a mess. But when I make egg salad, where I'm just going to crush them all anyway, they all perfect. So that'll be a sermon illustration someday, I'm sure. Not a good one.
The egg theory.
Yeah, the egg theory of God. So yeah, this is a fun wrestling kind of text. See, I personally like these kind of texts and these messages because it doesn't leave you in a good, like, it leaves you in a good place, even though it feels like it doesn't. Like you're left there like, ugh, suffering. And they're still suffering, and I still don't know. He didn't tell me exactly why, and we don't know exactly what's behind it all, so we're still left in this confusing place where we don't have all the answers. But the comfort of the cross is there, and it's front and center. And it's like, you know what? We look to the cross, we look through the cross. That is how we know God. So it's like it's that comfort in that uncomfortable comfort. I don't know if being Irish is masochistic like that. I don't know. Just, so, I mean, that's a German thing, but I'm not German, so maybe that's why I know it'll play well with all you German people. So, who actually is German here or has German heritage? See,
I got Irish.
Irish, yeah.
yeah, see,
I got Irish.
I know my people. All right, thank you. Let's see how the sermon goes.